Hey guys, Rico here. Today I'm going to be making my own Scuf controller for you guys to see. This is one I've already made and I've been using for 2 months now. The reason I made a Scuf controller was because I didn't really want to fork out $1,500 and then it doesn't work on the Xbox One. The other reason was I couldn't get hold of the local distributor. They wouldn't reply to my messages or emails, so I thought, well, I wanted the benefits of it, and I think you already know the benefits of a Scuf controller if you're searching for it online. So I googled it and I couldn't find a complete video that was really beneficial. A lot had some parts missing and stuff like that, so I thought, well, why not make a video to show you guys what to do. Here's my controller. I've been using it for 2 months now. Here's the buttons on the back, trigger stops, all that. White buttons. I'll give you links to where you can get all these little parts from on my website, but I'll post links in the comment section below. Yeah, so just pay attention. It's pretty easy. Right guys, we're going to be using a T9 Torx screw. It's got a hole in the middle so you can get into these special screws. You got to take out 7 screws, 3 right there, and then you take the battery pack off. The last one will be behind a barcode sticker that you need to peel away. Once you get those screws loose, you can tug on the analog sticks and they'll come up, they'll click out, and then you can pry the remote open. Just use your nail and get in there, pull it apart, and then just put it to one side. Okay, you can remove the motherboard from the controller by just pulling it away. Just be gentle at all stages throughout the process, as it is delicate. You don't want to mess it up. The rumble packs will also come out because they are still attached. Just flip it over. Once you've got that done, you can pull the analog sticks off. They come straight away. Get the left and right bumper plastic away. All the pads and all the buttons will then come out. Just be careful when you take it apart. All of them will fall out. Don't lose anything because you'll be short of buttons later on. You can pull that last piece off the bottom. Right, in order to get the D-pad off, you've got to remove 2 screws before unclipping it. Those screws are pretty small, so you need a small screwdriver. It's a star screwdriver. Right there, you have to just unclip 2 little clips and it should just come straight away pretty easily. I recommend you put all your stuff in a little container so you don't lose anything. It's just easier that way. To get the trigger off, you've got to just pry the little arm away, get a screwdriver in there and just gently clip it out. Watch out, there is a spring in there, so don't let it shoot away. The trigger will then just slide off. Right, so we're going to look at where to solder the buttons or the wires that go to the buttons. So we're going to use our A and B pad there. What you're going to do is going to take a craft knife and gently just scrape away a bit of the black part of the button on either top and bottom of that line that runs through the middle of it. It doesn't have to be big, it's just enough to get a good solder onto it. There you go, I'm going to point to you. Obviously that's one side. There's a top done on either of those buttons, you still have to do the bottom of it. We're using very fine solder, soldering iron obviously. And then I just get this solder stand. It's just much easier to hold this thing. It gets really hot. You don't want to burn yourself. It just burns you instantly. Right, so what you want to do is just put a little bit of solder on those points that you scraped away on those buttons. It's just really like a tiny little drop where you can get a connection with the wires that you're going to put on. So it is quite delicate and quite fine work, so just practice a bit on something if you can. But you'll get the hang of it in a couple tries, and then you'll get used to it. So once you got that done, you're gonna, there we go, let's zoom in on it. Both sides have got a bit of solder on them. That's the kind of wire I'm using. It's just Scooby wire. It's really thin gauge wire, and it's really cool that it's so easy to move around and you can bend it and all of that. So what you want to do is solder a piece of wire onto either side of those 2 points that you've scraped away and put solder on. just making a good connection. You don't need a big piece of wire showing. You don't want anything touching, otherwise it won't work. Once you get that done, you got to do the B button. Same thing, top and bottom. As I say, don't burn yourself with this thing. It'll burn you before you even know. It's that hot. It is quite fun though, soldering stuff. Once you get that done, move on to the other wires. It's often a good advice to put a bit of solder onto the actual wire itself before you try solder it together. It just makes a better connection and it's easier to do. So I did with both wires there, and you'll see I then move on to soldering them onto the remote. Make sure you don't spill any solder across from one side of the button to the other side, otherwise your buttons will not work. But then again, there's not much that you can really do to mess it up, so if there's something not working, it's just go retrace your steps and see if there's anything you can see. Once you've got those wires all soldered up, you can sort of wrap them together, and then you're going to put them through that hole. That hole is actually not there for anything, so it's a free space to put your buttons, and it's going to link up with what we drilled out earlier, as you can see later. I'm just going to show you where the hair triggers will work is on that little point on either side of the trigger, well, on either trigger. That's where the hair trigger hits, and then all it is a small adjustment that you can make to make the trigger fire quicker. Next, we're going to be moving on how to do the trigger stops. I'm going to use my Dremel with the router attachment. It's basically like a drill, just a bit more precision based. You're going to be wanting to just make a hole big enough to get that 3mm nut in to fit in there. So where you're going to be aiming is, you'll see on the trigger, if you hold it into the light, you can see an outline just on the inside of the edge. I basically aim there, and as I say, it's just going to be big enough to fit a nut in it, so it's not a huge hole. There's the nut in question, there's the hole in the trigger. You just got to rather take it slow and rather than overdo it and mess up that trigger. Once you get the trigger done, you mix up some epoxy, fill in the gaps so that thing's not going anywhere. It does take a bit of finesse, but you'll get used to it. I use a little zip tie as a little brush, but you don't have to do that. I just find it easier to use. The epoxy is half-half. It's just a general epoxy. It works on most things. It's not like you're putting tremendous pressure on that needs anything else. Right, now I'm going to show you, we spoke about those hair triggers. If you take your trigger, you put it back in there, you'll see that the hair trigger point sits in that little groove, and just below there is where you want to be drilling to get those hair trigger pins in. Do the same thing either side, just mark a spot. It's right below that little indentation. It's easy to see, you can just mark it off there. Once you've got that marked, you can use a little drill bit, drill those holes out. Then after that, you can always check your alignment again, see if you've got the hole in the right place. I'd take a bit of sandpaper and just sand that out. You've got to make sure that hole is big enough for your cap screw, so it needs to be the same width or just slightly bigger, so there's no play on it or anything like that, or anything to stop the cap screw from going through. Alright, we're gonna be fitting these little nuts on the outside, so you've got a thread to thread the cap screw on. You need to make sure that it's level with that hole where the trigger comes through, otherwise the trigger's gonna scratch or catch on it. You take a bit of super glue just to get that first bit stuck on there. Just remember that it's super glue, don't stick your fingers together, and it does dry really quickly. All you want to do is just make a point on there where you can just fix it on, and then we're going to epoxy on that nut just now, so you don't need to be too careful with it, but it needs to line up, so just check the line up of it. Obviously you're going to do that to both sides. Right there is where I've got it stuck on. You can see it's there. We're gonna do the other side now. Once we got them both on, we're ready to epoxy. Obviously mix up your epoxy prior to it. Then just work epoxy all the way around the nut. Be careful, don't get it on the inside where the trigger goes, because then you're gonna have some rub. You don't want any of that. Basically you wanna get epoxy all the way around that nut, so it's got a lot of strength. Otherwise, if you do it too little, it's not gonna work, and the nut's gonna break away when you screw it in. Right, to drill where the buttons on the back will be, start with a small drill bit, and then you're gonna work your way up, couple sizes up until a 10 mil. I'll show you where to drill. If you look at the remote, you'll see there's a little indentation where I'm going to point to, and you'll see I marked just in front of it as well. That's where I like to put the buttons. It seems to work out. And you're going to do that both sides. It's pretty easy to see. It's just like a sort of leftover from a molding. It's an elliptical shape. So yeah, just mark that off. Once you've got that done, you can start drilling up there. I start with the small 2 mil drill bit, and then work up from there. So just drill either side. Just be gentle. Those drill bits are pretty delicate, so don't put force on it or anything like that. You'll snap them off. Once you got those holes drilled out, then sand them down. I use a little rat tail file just to make them smooth. Here we go. It's just to take the edge off. Don't mess up anything on the outside, because you want to paint it later, and any little blemish is going to show up through the paint probably. Okay, I like to give it a bit of a clean before we go to paint, because any dirt or anything like that's going to influence how your paint goes on, and you want a good finish at the end. So just clean off any dirt and any little residue from stickers or whatever you guys have on there. Once you get it nice and clean, we're going to masking tape up the trigger holes and the battery pack. It's pretty easy, just take some masking tape, stick it in there. Once you got it ready, we're ready to paint that. You're going to choose your colors. I'll be using yellow. There's a clear lacquer for the final, and first you're going to use primer. Just a normal grey primer. I'm going to rush through this painting. It's pretty basic. Basically you want light paint work. Too much and it's not going to dry off, and you're going to have a horrible fuzz. We're going to spray the bottom. Same thing, light coats, even coats. Shake that bottle to get the consistent spray. And then you need to wait for every layer to dry before you go to the next one, otherwise you're not going to get a good finish on the remote. Remember the battery pack and those two buttons, if they're not the same, or if they are the same, they're not A and B, I wanted to make them one color. There we get on to the first coat of color. You're going to do 3 coats primer, 3 coats color, 3 coats clear. As I said, let them dry in between. I know it is a bit painful waiting, but it'll give you a better finish at the end. So just repeat it obviously with the top and bottom and any other bits that you need to spray. And then we move on to the clear lacquer. It's just a good clear finish. It also provides protection against scratching, anything like that. It's also pretty fun to paint your own remote. Just another clear coat on the bottom, the battery pack and those 2 little buttons. Once you're done painting, you're left with those 2 like that. Finish. Right, we're going to cut the buttons. To mark the buttons, I just mark it there and then halfway on either one. It's just a reference point. You can always grind it down later. I'm going to use the Dremel with the grinding wheel. Just be careful, don't cut yourselves. This thing will rather burn you than cut you, but still, I don't want you guys losing fingers. So yeah, just be careful, cut through it. And once you cut through it, you can just grind off all the little bits of plastic. Just grind them to the, you want both buttons the same length, obviously. So just grind it down to whatever you feel is right. It should be pretty level, to be honest. There we go, we've got two buttons the same size. The buttons are done, battery pack's ready to go. Right, to put, there's your tactile buttons. All you're going to do is mix up some epoxy, put a little dot right in the center of the button where you can stick that other button that you previously cut onto it. Be careful you don't get any epoxy around the edge of the actual tactile button, otherwise it's not going to work, it's going to stick there. And then you just leave these to dry. You're going to do both. So now once they dried off, you're going to put a little bit of super glue just on the edge of the square part of the tactile button or whatever button you're using, and then you're going to locate it in one of those holes that you drilled out earlier. It's just a little tack on the side so you can get it in position before you epoxy it into the remote. And just be gentle and be careful that you're not touching the button on any side of that hole. The hole should be slightly bigger than the actual button, so there's a bit of give either side. So smooth button push. Once you've got it in place like that, you're going to do the other side. Exactly the same thing, bit of super glue on there. Just get it into place in the same order. Any super glue will work, it's all pretty much the same. So there we go, slide it through, press it down, just get it in there. Right, there we got our two buttons in place. Now we're going to mix up our epoxy. Just epoxy all the way around that tactile button. Avoid the contact points obviously, otherwise you're not going to get a good flow of electricity through there. So as you see, I'll move the epoxy, it's around the sides. You might need to do a second batch if you don't mix up enough to start off with, but it's just got to cover that whole outside of the button so you get a strong finish to it, and those buttons are not going to go anywhere after that. Right, after that we're going to look at putting the triggers back on. Basically it's just a reverse process of earlier. Slide the trigger on, put the spring in, then you can kind of push the trigger back onto where it's supposed to be. It'll click in. Then you have to move that arm across to line up with that little end of the trigger, but it's pretty easy. You just push it in opposite directions and it'll clip in. Just be careful because it is delicate. There we go. We're just going to put a screwdriver in there, gently lever it across and back on. Obviously you got to do both sides, so again same process on the other side. Slide it on, get the spring, put it on that guardrail that it goes onto. This will go straight back, click it like that, and then you can just put it back together. Right, so here we're going to drill a hole for the cables to run through to the buttons from that previous clip that I mentioned. The hole, it's basically just to guide the cables around to the other side there. You just basically slide both sets through, one either way or either side. Now you're just measuring up how long you need to have the cables to solder onto the points of the buttons. So once you get the right length, all you're going to do is get some solder and then put it on. So then I use tape to keep the wires in the specific positions. You don't have to use it. So there we're going to put some solder on each wire just to get it primed and ready. You can also put a bit of solder on the contact points on the buttons, so it's just easier to do. Once you get solder on both of those, you're ready to go solder it up onto the buttons. Make sure that you're soldering the wires onto the right buttons, the one that you want when you're actually playing the game. So there we go. Be careful again not to burn yourself. All you're going to do is put it onto one side of the contact. These buttons have 4 contacts, but it doesn't really matter. You can put them either way. It might be specific to your buttons. So these ones are just put on the top. But as I said, it's unidirectional, so there's no right or wrong way. So there we go, that's pretty much one button done. And then we've got the other one done as well. Just put your tape in there to hold the wire down. Then we can fit the motherboard back in there. Just put the triggers first, and then those two battery holders at the back, slide them in, and you're good to go. We're going to put the analog sticks back on. They slip right on. And then you're going to put that bottom piece back on there. It's easier to do it this way, so just pay attention. Once you got that ready, you can put it to the side. Then we'll move on to the top cover. You're going to start with the D-pad again. They all slot into their own specific holes, it can't go wrong, so just click the D-pad back together. Then you're going to put in those two screws that you took out earlier. It should just click in because it's got two clips. Screw those screws in. Right, then you can start. That's the Xbox guide button. As I said, they've got slots, so it can't go wrong. It can only go in one way. Just a bit fiddly to get it done, but it'll drop in now. Then just remember what side your buttons are, but they can't go in wrong. The wire in. It is a bit of a little tedious process, but you have to get it right. Put those covers on, and then you can just slide the top or the bottom into the top with the analogs down. Click it into place. You can turn it over, you don't have to. Then drop in all the screws that you had from previous. Tighten all those up. With your tool. You don't have to over tighten, just tighten up till they get tight, but don't go too much, you'll strip out the plastic. Alright, we're going to move on to cutting up those cap screws. I started with 10mm cap screws. They're a bit long, so I cut them. The ones for the trigger stops don't have to be long at all. They just need to have enough thread on them to get a good purchase on the thread in the nut. So it's just going to be pretty short. I use that wrench because it won't move. There we go. Those are the ones for the hair triggers. They're a bit longer. It's got to reach further. So again, use your hand to do those ones because it is quite delicate. But the ones in the trigger stops, you can use a little Allen key to turn them in. Don't go overboard and tighten them too much. Just nip them up. Right. So after that, to test the head trigger, watch the trigger. It'll release, and that's basically what the head trigger does. It allows you to have that little bit of extra reach or less reach on the trigger. Now we're going to move over to some gameplay with the things to show you that it works. That's going prone with the B button, then jumping with the A. This is in Black Ops 2, by the way, if you didn't know. So that's just jumping and then going prone. We'll move over to the hair triggers and the trigger stops. This little pistol shoots really quick with the triggers. You can see just how many shots I get off in a short little time. That's a bit of gameplay with the jumping and going prone. It really is much quicker for these kind of guns, select fire guns, or semi-auto like the FUL, the SMR, and a couple of the pistols like the TAC 45. So there we have it, guys. Your very own Scuf controller. So guys, you get your own Scuf controller now. If you like the video, please rate and subscribe and follow me on Twitter. I'll put links to my Twitter account there, and I'll be bringing you more videos. I'll also try to modify a new Xbox One controller in the future when it comes out. I think it's going to be pretty similar. But yeah, like I said before, the hair triggers are the hardest part to make on that whole thing. So it's not necessary. The biggest benefits you're going to get from are the trigger stops and the buttons on behind. So yeah, guys, thanks very much. Cheers.